I was early at Salesforce.com, although I would say not early enough. I do need to continue to work to provide for that big family. But I was early at Salesforce and created an outbound sales team and system to help them almost double their growth. And this is like early 2000s, and Salesforce was still about 150 people, 20, 25 million in revenue, and ended up writing a book, Predictable Revenue, about that. And there's a sequel recently called Impossible to Inevitable. So I'll share some highlights for these. Plus, as James mentioned, big family. I don't think we actually have a picture with all our kids in it. I just never seems to work out. But this really has been my motivation to grow as a person and as a business person to make more money. So I think we'll go through these kind of 5 steps, like this playbook to reignite growth. Playbooks are always changing. So this is something that, the principles of what it takes to make money and grow a business don't change. I think a lot these days is showing us like how much more adaptable we have to be to do it. So talk about the blank page, specialize in sales, nailing a niche, or in the States, you'd say a niche, creating predictable pipeline, and in the United States, it's a when, not an if. Okay, no shocker, right? This year is the anti-predictable year or unpredictable year. And by the way, it's not done yet. There'll be more surprises. I personally believe, although no one knows what's going on. I believe it's going to get worse before it gets better. It could get a lot more worse. Why are we opening up pubs right now internally? I don't know. But there's tens of millions of people on unemployment in the United States alone. The government's propping it up. That can't go on. So I hope it doesn't get worse, but it's just hard not to think it will. And yet, with all of this, the more disruption there is, just means there's more opportunity for our teams, for ourselves. Like everything is restructuring. It's almost like this old growth forest is being burned down so that a new forest can grow. Doesn't feel good for lots of people. How many people have ended up in the hospital? Obviously the death rate is high. Businesses have gone out of business. People lost jobs, right? There's tremendous turmoil and pain, and yet huge opportunity, more opportunity than ever before. So if you can invest in yourself personally as a single person and as a business, you'll be in a better place in a year or two or however long this takes. But some examples of what's going on would be if you are still like drastically missing quota as a person, as a team or business. There's a lot of companies that have had to completely scratch and throw away prior activity or sales quotas, like things from last year, and you have to basically do them from scratch. Some of you might be able to adjust them, right? There's this whole degree of who's been affected drastically or a little bit. Virtual selling, that's not going away, right? Remote management, that's not going away. There's a lot of people, I think around half the people who are working remotely want to stay remote. There's a lot of businesses, mine included. We've got about 55 people, mostly North America. Like we actually want to stay virtual. So in essence, there's this blank page that we all have, this reset button, and how we want to work, how we want to make money, when, where, and it is a great opportunity, even though it may not feel like that frequently. So what I would encourage you to do, and I think this is kind of helping develop your entrepreneurial mindset, is entrepreneurs take problems and they create solutions. They create opportunity out of problems. So, start with, if you're really struggling, like what are all the problems you're having? Like get it out of your system, make a list. But then like you're just putting on paper all the thoughts you think anyway, because we all have problems. Then for those same problems, or what is the opportunity here? So let's say a simple one, say you hate working remotely because you just can't tell when your work should stop and when your personal time should begin. And there's also lots of challenges with working remotely if you have kids and dogs. And okay, well, that's also a great opportunity to learn more boundaries with yourself, like how to be more organized or disciplined, or kind of set yourself up for better success personally. Just an example, right? There's a lot of lead gen and sales challenges now, and getting through that will make us sharper, more organized, more focused in how we grow companies. That's the first one. We're, as a company, going through this too. We had a minor hit. We had a couple months with sales, went to 0 or close to it. Things have been picking back up a lot. We had a really good month last month and this month, but that could change anytime. So it is a chance really to think about like, what would be your ideal business, ideal job? How do you want to work? How do you make progress to that? How do you kind of break old habits? Are we doing old habits and working that way just because it's a habit? I mean, a lot of times, yes. And this could take a lot longer than we want to feel like something goes back to normal. It might feel a little normal now. For a lot of you, maybe not, either financially or personally. This could be years of different ways we adapt to this. So it's not going away in the next few weeks. Now, moving away from COVID, there's this other Uber trend that's just as important. It's not as kind of as urgent, but it's been going on for decades, and it will continue to go on, is this overwhelm. Just too much information, apps, channels, messages. And this is going to inform sort of everything we talk about, which is when everyone is overwhelmed, buyers are overwhelmed and sellers are overwhelmed. The answer to that, or one of the answers, is focus. That really is one of the keys, or maybe the main key to reigniting your growth. So let's start and talk about specializing sales, because this is really, it's about focus. Now, salespeople shouldn't prospect much. This might be old news to some of you. I mean, to James, obviously, but I find there's still so many companies that don't embrace this. Paul Fifield, great, I love Paul. He started the Sales Impact Academy. I would recommend checking that out. Old client, but he said that in the UK and Europe, most teams still don't embrace this idea that first, that salespeople shouldn't prospect much. I mean, usually they don't like to do it. They're not very good at it, and even if they can do it well, they can't keep it up. And the answer to, okay, what do you do? What's probably like the most fundamental thing you can do to make your sales team more successful? It's really follow the lead of any sports team, especially the most successful ones. And what they do is the coach doesn't go out and tell all their players, okay, everybody attack and everybody defend. Says no. He or she says, all right, we've got attackers, defenders, and midfield. And likewise, in sales, you want to have different roles so you can work as a team. That may or may not include all of these types. It might be a bit different for you. But in this case, you might have lead response, which is responding to marketing leads if you hopefully get some. Outbound prospecting is its own dedicated role, because you're just not going to get good results from outbound unless you have dedicated people or a dedicated resource. A third type of role is the sales people, account executives, signing new customers. And then the last one, customer success, is kind of or account management, a bucket for all the things that happen after the sale. Right? This is the key. If you're not doing this, and most companies, even if you are, I find they don't go far enough to add enough roles. This really creates this underpinning of success for the sales team, no matter what else you're doing with lead generation, training, or hiring. If you don't do this, you're going to struggle. And just to put a little emphasis on that, when you do specialize, not only can, the whole idea is that people can't do, salespeople, but also people can't do a bunch of things well. Salespeople cannot prospect and close and maintain customers and respond to website leads well. They just can't. Maybe 1 out of 20, 1 out of 15. But when you specialize your sales teams this way, and you have different groups acting in concert, you get much better insights into what's working and not working with your team, more scalability with how you hire, train, onboard, and ramp. And you create this talent garden, this farm team system, to bring in people at different levels and grow them up through the ranks in a lot less risky way to build a team than trying to hire everyone from the outside. I mean, I would generally say that 2/3 of your salespeople, best people, should be coming up through the ranks in your company. So that could vary quite a bit. And again, without more specialization, you're going to struggle. So a couple of questions come up a lot. Hey, we're too small. I only have 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 5 people. Well, you should start when you are 1 person or 2 people. If you have 2 people, it's generally a junior and senior person, like a lead gen person on the junior side, a salesperson on the senior side. But even if you're 1 person, if you're the CEO selling, you can block out time on your calendar, because really this is about focus. The principle is focus, people doing fewer things better. So if you have to adapt this to the way your business works, or you're only 1 person, that's really what you're looking to do. Focus time or focus goals. Also, won't relationships and service suffer? You know, we want our salespeople to be building the relationship from the beginning. Sounds good, but what ends up happening, unless they only have a handful of relationships, is they give great service to some people, like the customers trying to sign, and poor or irregular service to everyone else. So when you specialize, you can actually make sure everyone gets great service at every step of the way. that your customer is taking, prospect to signing to being an ongoing customer. Right, nailing a niche. Now this is, how do you kind of relook at systematizing market message fit? Is your growth been dependent on relationships or word of mouth? Right, that's great because we love those leads, we love those relationships, but it can be a curse because you can become dependent on it. So how would you create paid growth, especially like on the lead generation front with outbound marketing or outbound prospecting? How do you create the ability to reach out to new markets and talk to people who don't know you and start qualified conversations? This is Oracle, or at least part of Oracle. Like, so much confusion. It's great. How do you, going back to this overwhelm, right? Salespeople are overwhelmed at Oracle. Customers are overwhelmed. Now, Oracle is Oracle. You might be a startup and you might be saying, wow, we could sell kind of almost to anyone. We could sell or any place. So overwhelm is a real thing. And part of the key here is realizing, yes, you can do all these things. Maybe these are capable. If you're a services or consultant, you can do 15 different services. If you're a SaaS startup, maybe you can go to 15 different types of target markets, be it geographic or vertical. Maybe Oracle has it's just too much. So the trick here is when you are communicating to prospects, especially earlier, like people who don't know you, early in that cycle of getting to know you, and they're not willing to put much energy into figuring you out, you want to take all these things you do and try to make sure it's very clear, how is it relevant to them? You want to spell it out to them, make it easy for them to understand. It's as if you're a radio station, and instead of saying, hey, we do music, we can do opera or jazz, rock and roll, classic, we can do all that. What do you want? You're saying, you know what? We do rock. You clarify your signal, make it easy for those prospects to pick out your signal in this overwhelming sea of information. Because when you have too much information on your website, in your cold emails, in your first deck, you just tend to confuse people. And you can also confuse your own people if you have too much information, right? Again, everyone's in this overwhelm. And when people are confused, they say no. They may not actually use the word no. They might say later, or maybe, I don't know, send me information or too expensive, but they resist it in some way. And this is really your main enemy, this is your main competition. This usually ends up as no decision, but a lot of that's from confusion, lack of clarity. So the goal is going from this step of working with, sort of depending on relationships and the chance to have high trust with people or a lot of time with people on this right side of the green, and moving towards how do we, especially on the lead generation front, but this applies throughout the sales cycle, how do we create so much clarity with our message and our specificity with who we're talking to, that we have the ability to, even with people who don't trust us, to start conversations and get them interested in learning more. And when we talk about niche, it's not about thinking small, right? This is about being focused. You want to be a big fish in a small pond, but it's easier to make the pond smaller than the fish bigger, which means to tighten your targeting, sharpen your messaging. Now, we are in this world where a lot of companies do need to change the fish, right? Their business model, their product, their service offerings. And it's just extra challenging at the same time. But if you feel like your product and service is solid, there's always sharpening you can do on the targeting and messaging. So I think an easy place to start is really thinking to the differences between the customers to whom you've been a nice to have. How are those different to the customers to whom you've been a need to have? And one example of a nice to have is let's say you're a SaaS company and you do demos and people are like, wow, that's so cool. But they don't call you back. Now, of course, these are some crazy times. There'd be lots of reasons for this, but you're looking for the differences, not just who should use your service, but who needs it. And they showed need by having been the most interested to buy in the past and usually pay the most money. I went through this personally about 12 years ago, leaving Salesforce, experimenting. I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to make as much money as I want to do what I love. So I created this thing called Unique Genius. This is a ways back. I created this thing called CEO Flow, turn your employees into mini CEOs. And those are great. And I see them coming back someday. But when I got married and I had a family to support, I used to remember this moment, oh shit, I need to make more money myself as now to support a family. and having babies and everything. So that forced me to nail my own personal niche at the time, right? Who paid me the most money, where I delivered the best results, where I had the most kind of strength. And that was with outbound prospecting. So I know that there's different reasons where you resist focusing on a specific niche. It's too small, boring. Sometimes there's all these reasons, but that is these days reassessing like who your ideal customers are, who need you the most money, what are their problems, because all that might have changed for the past few months. Like that's one of the key steps towards reigniting growth. Like what do your customers want? Because they don't care what you do. They only care about what you do for them. And kind of revisiting this. I love this example. This is my daughter, Aurora. She had an iTunes card when she was younger, and for $25, she said, "Dad, can you just buy this off me? Because, I'm like, I was like, no, I don't need it. What am I going to do with it?" And the next day she came back and said, "Hey, Dad, we do family night, Friday night movie night, and there's a bunch of classic movies you guys want to get. So you could use this iTunes card to buy those movies." And I thought, I'm like, yeah, she's actually right. And I bought it off her. So again, it's probably never that simple, but just an illustration of how to speak in your customer's language. There was a client who was selling to hospitals in the States, complicated financial departments they have. They'd say, "Who's in charge of receivables?" And there's different people, different types of receivables, and they weren't getting responses. And they switched that to who handles patient cash, and instantly got a better response rate. So this is really about that nailing a niche, really about getting into your customers' minds, to think like them so you can know who the right ones are and how to talk to them. All right, of course, we got to talk about outbound prospecting and predictable lead generation, because this really is your lever for growth. If you haven't seen this, this is in both books because it's so important. These 3 types of leads. And likewise, there's 3 types, as at home, 3 types of princesses. They all have their pros and cons, just like the 3 types of leads. We got lots of pros. We got the grandpa princess, lots of cons, and we got the big brother princess, just for fun. And likewise, we've got these 3 kinds of leads, right? There's seeds, nets, and spears, and they're different. The problem is when you treat them all the same, right? If your business has been growing off of, so seeds would be word of mouth, customer referrals, relationships. And if you've built your business off of that so far, trying to make projections in the future are, you can't say, "Hey, we did $1 million or £1 million last year with 1,000 leads. And if we need to double to 2 million this year, we need twice as many leads." It doesn't work. You might need 5 times as many leads, because nets, which is marketing leads, you might need 10 or 50 nets or marketing leads to be worth 1 great word of mouth lead. And spears, of course, outbound prospecting. You have a targeted list and you're going after partners or customers or marketing opportunities. So let's talk a bit about outbound, because that's really been my specialty. I don't know if a lot of these companies are famous for creating inbound growth, but they also all do outbound. Google does outbound. Facebook does outbound. Hubs, like the inbound companies, hubs. So everybody does outbound at some point. And even for consumer companies, outbound can be used. The same process can be done to go after partners or to go after marketing opportunities. So there really is a place for every company. Maybe not today, but at some point. Now, there's so much noise. Outbound, though, it's never about the technology. Ultimately, the technology, the tool, the scripts, the calls, the list building, and even hiring. Really, ultimately, it's really about the dashboard. And in outbound, it's extra challenging because dashboards are hard to get to be accurate in outbound. There's a lot of subjectivity. So this is our old car, and we from Los Angeles couldn't bring it. Of course, you can only drive a 9-seater here, or I guess I need a new license if I want to drive something bigger. But if the gas gauge was off, if the speedometer was off, if my maps were off, I'm going to have a lot of trouble. And yet with outbound, usually our metrics are off. There's just more subjectivity. Was this outbound or not? Was this qualified or not? And so part of this, I'd say this is just a typical outbound funnel. And this funnel is going to look different than the marketing funnel. And the funnel is going to look different than a seeds funnel. Again, the seeds, nets, and spears are all different. So that's one other mistake, is that sometimes people who've done marketing try to translate marketing metrics to outbound. It just doesn't work. So in an outbound funnel, typically you would look at the number of activities, are those getting results? But the thing that tends to be missed is typically the main metric. There's really two key metrics for an outbound prospecting team, right? And this is primarily focused on when you have dedicated prospectors. If you have people doing it part-time, you can use some of this. It's just you cannot build a predictable system with people doing this part-time. Not in a reliable, consistent way. I haven't seen it. So as soon as you can get one person, even one person dedicated, like the magic starts happening. But this number 3, the number of qualified audited opportunities being generated per month by a prospector is really the key. And what that means is it doesn't matter how many meetings they're setting. It doesn't matter how many meetings are held. How many of those meetings turn into an accepted sales opportunity is defined by the criteria. Sales accepted leads, sales qualified opportunity, however you define that, that's really the key metric. And then, of course, after that, how much of that closes into revenue. So the place that's mainly missed is this sort of audit process to make sure that all these opportunities being claimed for outbound credit actually were outbound and were actually qualified. So then you end up hopefully with a funnel like this. This is Zora's, and everything's a bit personal. I mean, everyone's funnel is a bit different. Zora is a $200 million company in the States. They're about $1 billion or $2 billion in valuation. And for their people doing prospecting, they have list building goals. They've got activity goals. LinkedIn should probably be on here, but they've got goals then to get conversations with a prospect. And ultimately, this is really they have a sense of predictability with, if we do X, we get Y. And whether it's an outbound or inbound, this is what you're going for. How can we invest in a certain area in lead generation to get enough pipeline that we have confidence to generate revenue? And again, all this might have been changing these few months. And so a lot of what the recommendations and what I keep saying is, if you have a lot of turmoil in your lead gen program, you might have to measure it week by week or every 2 weeks. You might have to, there have probably been companies who had to recreate their comp system. It might even have to do kind of week by week, month by month revisiting of how they measure and comp people, if there really is a lot of turmoil there. Be very adaptable and agile. Just one quick lesson on emails and messages, keep them short. This is like, if there's one thing on email or LinkedIn, any kind of messaging, short and simple to understand, easy to act on. Just make it easy on people. Just make it easy on people. Separately, when you have people, because the world's more connected, what works gets copied more quickly than ever. And this is an example of SalesLoft, right? SVP, Jeremy, friend of mine. SalesLoft is great, by the way. Ollie, hope you're here. So when you don't want to sound like everybody else, it's hard to avoid that these days. So again, that's one reason I love James' intro, right? He has his own voice, and you can really, he's not just a talking head. So I know one thing that we're doing is, in our team, is just helping people try to find more of themselves. This is part of our own internal sales team, our SDR team, and helping each other, like, what are your passions? What are you stuck on? What do you need help with? And then they are kind of developing their own unique genius and their own style. And that bleeds off into the way they work and interact with people. Plus, they have a lot more actual connection with each other. They're not just really talking about work, they're talking about themselves. And that's one thing that's been missing with all the Zooms, is just a lot of times it can be like flat, this connection with other people. So just to wrap it up, if you have challenges with your outbound team, and there can be all kinds, right? Just not seeing the pipeline you want, or revenue you want, or the deal sizes are too small, or win rates are too small. And especially primarily if you have prospectors, but any kind of outbound prospecting challenges can be related. These are probably the most common solutions to the most common problems we see in outbound prospecting teams. So if you have SDRs, like sales development reps, right? These are those junior salespeople who are doing the appointment setting for salespeople. Inbound SDRs respond to marketing leads. Outbound SDRs do prospecting. Those have to be completely separate. You cannot have outbound prospectors doing inbound lead response. It's just it's oil and water. Talk about that another time. Outbound SDR should be matched specific salespeople and basically partner with them and not be kind of like pooled. You don't want to pay for meetings, right? Only compensate on those two metrics I mentioned: sales accepted leads, whatever your term is for when something enters is passed off to a salesperson and they accept it and revenue from those deals. If anyone has sales, now this isn't sales managers or SDR team managers with more than 10 reports, that's a big problem. And you got to have some form of territories to divide and conquer a market. So just a few quick notes if you got that team. I would be curious to see how many people even have SDRs these days. I know it's something that I've talked with a lot of leaders here, like it's still not enough. Like it can transform your sales team. I know that I can't tell you how many people have said that when they specialize their sales teams as one, and partly included at the SDR approach, whether inbound or outbound, they saw their results double. So when you do get a predictable lead generation system, whether again outbound, inbound, but these are some examples from the States, you can multiply your results. Whether it's just more meetings to start. Kemperton was a company that went from kind of failing at outbound and lead generation to generating a lot of money in the first year. And the Acquia was a company that was probably 40 million in revenue, mostly from inbound. They wanted to layer on outbound to get to 100 million in revenue. They did. They had 3 dedicated prospectors for 6 months, got some data, and then they decided they wanted to hire 40 more. And they added an extra 30 million in incremental revenue. And then last year they sold to Vista for $1 billion in revenue, $1 billion. So one just last note, entering the USA. I mean, the USA is the largest market of buyers in the world, and people love to buy stuff there. There's great advice from Stephen Millard of Notion VC. I remember he told me once that they recommend is for companies in Europe to be successful in your home country, then go to the States, and then go back to other countries in Europe. And I think there was a lot of wisdom to that. Now, everyone's different, but I think the USA, it's used for people, it's a when are you going to do it, not whether you are going to do it. So as we wrap up, here are these 5 points, right? This idea of work as a blank page, right? You can recreate things, including your sales team. You got to specialize it. Add more roles. That people do not have enough roles. With nailing a niche, things could have changed. Who needs you the most these days? With lead generation or outbound, you got to make sure you have one person and it's their top priority. If it's priority number 2, it's just going to get pushed. And with the USA, when are you going to do it, and how can you do it in a way that it reduces the risk and cost? So with that, I'll say thanks. I'm probably over a minute or 2, but this people ask about which book is the best to start with. For most people, The Impossible book is the best to start with. It was ranked the 8th best startup book of all time, although there's a lot for anyone. And if you are interested in getting into the USA market or deciding whether you should or not yet, you can always reach out to me or the team, predictablerevenue.com/EMEA. And James, I'll turn it back to you.